Since the dawn of humanity, people have been asking the question, why are we here? What's the purpose of this life? Why were we born into the circumstances that we were? And is there an afterlife? And today I'm going to take a crack at answering some of those questions. I already touched upon this in a previous video about life purpose, but I want to talk about a different aspect of it today. And the topic's going to be, is Earth a school or a prison? Is this a school planet or is it a prison planet? It can certainly feel like both at different times in our lives. But what it really comes down to is one's mindset. Are you willing to learn the lessons that the universe is putting in front of you through the circumstances that are manifesting in your life? Are you willing to learn, or are you going to keep repeating the same mistakes month after month, year after year, lifetime after lifetime? God's very patient and he'll wait for you to learn. But if we can identify the purpose of life and take it upon ourselves to learn and accelerate the process of evolution, we're going to have a much better time here. So if you're receptive and you're receptive to learning lessons and learning from your mistakes, learning from your suffering, you're going to evolve much quicker. You're going to have a much better time of things than if you really hold strong to, no, this is the way I do things and I'm going to make this work. This is very abstract, so I'm going to give several examples here from my own life now of some very interesting stories and lessons I've learned. So a couple years ago, I was working a 9 to 5, and I just really wasn't satisfied. Maybe 6, 7, 8 months into that job, it was good. It had good benefits. It was fairly well paying. On the surface, it looked good. But I just kind of knew after that initial period that I'm going to look for any way out of this that I can. So that was a lesson. That wasn't really one of the lessons I was planning on explaining, but that was a lesson in itself, is when you're in a soul-draining work, when you're in unfulfilling work, don't just stay in that. A lot of people would stay in that for years on end just because it's comfortable. But the point of life isn't to be comfortable. The point of life is to grow. So if you're in that and it's kind of just draining you and you don't have energy for the things you care about, it's a good idea to find a way out of that situation. So that's what I did. And what I found, I was kind of looking for any way out. What am I going to do next? What I actually ended up finding was a thing called advantage play, or specifically card counting when it comes to the game of blackjack. So just to give a brief explanation so people will understand the story, through a system of counting cards and keeping track of what cards come out of the shoe when you're playing blackjack, you can gain an advantage over the house. So I spent hundreds of hours perfecting that practice, getting tested out by professionals. And then I hit the road and started going to casinos. At first I was doing this while I still had a 9 to 5. The other thing that's important to know is when these casinos catch on to what you're doing, they'll say, hey, your game's too good for us. You can't play blackjack here anymore. So it was a lot of fun, and it was a very interesting experience, and I learned a lot from it. So I'm going to go into kind of what I learned and, the lessons from that. So as I started, really getting more into this and spending a lot of time at the casino, that vibration, sitting in that environment, definitely has an effect. And it kind of lowers your overall vibration. I picked up a smoking habit. When the count would go low, I'd get up from the table and go smoke a cigarette. And I'd be staying up all night, not getting that good of sleep. Especially, when I was on a road trip, just going state to state, casino to casino with my partner I was doing it with. It was a lesson I had to learn that I don't want to do that full time. And, I may go back to it at some point, just on the side here and there. But, you know, the environment you're in and what you do, it has an impact on your consciousness. It's important to realize that. And also just the, you know, obsessive mindset of, I got to get as many hours in as possible. We got to save on the expenses, sleep in the cheapest hotel. Just, and, you know, constantly listening to these podcasts and thinking of just little ways to generate extra value. It becomes very exhausting day after day, sitting in the casino, driving to the next state, staying up all night. It's a very exhausting lifestyle. And, you know, sometimes after the day was done, we'd get a drink, and it just wasn't very healthy. And I'd also was drinking lots of energy drinks. I get a Red Bull from the waiter, you know, at the table. So the main story I want to get into is, you know, we were just so obsessed with making money. I had basically burned, we started off the trip in Denver. I'd burned all the casinos there. They'd all back me off or trespassed me from the property. So I decided to go to the next state. I think, where was the next state? It must have been New Mexico, maybe. I don't remember what state I was going to next, but the point is, it was snowing outside, and it was kind of like blizzard conditions. And I had a Tesla that had somewhat good tires for the weather, but they weren't specifically snow tires. But I decided that I was going to go generate that expected value, generate that money, and get on to the next casino, which was a very stupid decision because just having the chance to make some extra money isn't worth potentially risking my life to drive in these hazardous conditions. And actually, as I was driving down a mountain road, it was just kind of sketchy, and I was taking it careful. But at a certain point, the conditions really got pretty bad. You could barely see in front of you. There was snow all over the road. And as I was kind of taking a turn, I lost control of the car, started spinning out. And then the car kind of luckily hit the side of a snowbank. I bounced off of it and regained control of the vehicle. You know, which that was very exhilarating. And, you know, that was a lesson I had to learn. Don't play with my life. Don't throw away my life for what? The chance to make some extra money, a little bit extra money. It's nowhere near worth it. You know, and it was a miracle in its own right. Had that incident happened 30, 50 feet earlier, I would have slid off the side of the mountain and probably died. So, it was basically a miracle that also there really wasn't a scratch on the car or any damage miraculously. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't worth throwing away my life for that. And, you know, also that wasn't the lifestyle I want to live. You know, if I was to do it again in the future, I'd definitely keep it in check. First of all, you know, having my sobriety really rock solid, not drinking energy drinks, not smoking cigarettes. But also maybe going for 2 weeks at a time rather than 2 months at a time if I'm going to do a big trip. But then again, this may be just something that I very rarely or never do again because, you know, I have bigger plans, and you know, I really want to contribute and make a difference in the world rather than just making money for myself. And that was another lesson that came out of it, is what do I really want out of life and what's meaningful. And then, you know, something else that happened, and this is kind of related, and it's really not related, but it's another lesson from this school. And you can see, you know, it's a school. All these experiences happen for a reason, and I'm learning from it. To where I could have just doubled down and been, you know what, no, I'm going to continue this card counting thing, and I could have still been doing it now. But you know, what happened after I got back home, and, you know, I kind of got back into my meditative practice. And there was I was still smoking cigarettes here and there, and there was one day I was meditating, and I was in a very peaceful state, but then just suddenly somehow I started to freak out. And it wasn't even that I started to freak out, it's just my heart just started going crazy, and like just heart rate started elevating. And it got to the point where I went to my dad, and he put his Apple Watch on me, and my heart rate was going 150, 160 beats per minute. My resting heart rate's like 50, 60. So, my heart rate wasn't going down. So we ended up calling the paramedics, and they kind of hooked me up to IVs and started pumping fluids through me. At a certain point before they came, I just kind of accepted. I thought I was going to die. I thought I was having a heart attack. I was just going to die. So I accepted my death. Like, I was kind of freaking out a little bit, and then I just accepted the fact that, okay, if this is my time, it's my time. If I'm going to die here, then so be it. And when I accepted that, even though the body was going crazy, like, I kind of just fell back into a state of a little more peacefulness of just, what's so bad about actually dying, and, kind of recognizing that it's just the physical form that I'm going to lose. So that was a lesson in not being afraid of death and transcending the body. And then, shortly, at this point, I got the timeline mixed up. I think it was shortly after that happened where the profits, or, the money I had left over from the card counting thing, I'd invested that all into cryptocurrency, and I was doing pretty well with it. I had a decent amount of money in there. But what happened was I looked up this project, and I was trying to connect my wallet and stake the tokens, or I was trying to do something with it. And there had been a knockoff site that was created that I didn't know. It looked very much like the legitimate site. Exactly the same, actually. And I connected my wallet and signed one transaction, and then that allowed them to drain all of the tokens from my wallet. And that contained a majority of my life savings. So that was another lesson in just not being attached. I think all these lessons sort of culminated in teaching the bigger lesson of non-attachment, not being attached to the body, not being afraid of death, not being attached to money. It's just money. And even the card counting thing, like thousands of dollars flying across the table back and forth between me and the dealer, it's just like a concept. Like, what's money? Like, the only thing, people can chase money for all their lives, and it's an important thing, but you got to put it in perspective of the purpose of money is what it can do for you and the freedom that it can allow you to have. And it's not an end in its own right, which so many people treat it as. So, the non-attachment for money, the non-attachment to even death, and just learning to take care of my body and not throw my life away. Those were all important lessons that I learned. So, like these circumstances that happen to us, it's all really God trying to teach us a lesson. And if we don't learn that lesson, and if we're just stubborn and stick to the ego's stories and mechanisms, then Earth becomes a prison. Because as long as you don't learn that lesson is going to appear to you again later in life. Even in the next life, you're going to have to come back and repeat the same circumstances, because God's going to make sure you learn that lesson however long it takes. So it's up to you. Do you want to repeat this karma? Do you want to repeat these circumstances 100 times, or do you want to learn the lesson now? It's up to your mindset, and it's up to your willingness to improve. Sometimes we just got to get knocked over and over again, and that's how we learn. Like these circumstances that happened to me, for a while I was depressed when I lost my life savings. I did fall into a funk a little bit. It was a hard lesson to learn. But realistically, something that I've heard is that fast karma is good karma. All these lessons coming to me within the span of about 2 years, very difficult. And then the other thing I didn't mention was a breakup with my girlfriend that happened recently, and just learning not to be attached to another person, just to love another person, but not be attached to where it's going to hurt if that falls away as much. I mean, of course, you know, relationships are a challenge and it's not easy going through a breakup, but you know, all these circumstances kind of just culminating in the lesson of non-attachment again. And fast karma is good karma because I'm learning these lessons quick and I'm able to work through it. And that's opening up room for more of the authenticity to come through with doing what I really want to do, creating this YouTube channel and kind of moving into potentially a spirituality coaching role. I'm actually looking to set up a newsletter very soon, so stay tuned for that. You know, and it's also really great to just open up and just expose what's happened in my life, because I know that even though these circumstances were very unique, people might be able to relate this to circumstances that have happened in their own life, and it helps to have an example there. So yeah, and I like to kind of give an action step at the end of these videos. So what I would say is start journaling. You know, just journal about circumstances that have happened in your life, the lessons you need to learn, or really just whatever's on your mind, some issue you're going through. Journaling can really help. So, you know, get out a journal and journal for 20 minutes right now or when you have some time. And if you can, turn that into a weekly habit, maybe 30 minutes per week at least. I kind of just do it whenever I feel inclined, and I found it's been very useful to kind of just organize my thoughts and just kind of attune myself with where my intuition is really going, and learn those lessons that are appearing through the outer circumstances in my life. Ultimately, the lesson that's trying to be taught to you is that to just rely on God and be okay with whatever He brings you, and have faith that the right things are going to come into your life without you going out there and trying to force it. That's when things always take a turn for the worse. Just relax, listen to your intuition. It doesn't mean not to use your intellect on tasks. It doesn't mean not to be practical, but don't be obsessive in trying to chase after goals and overthink. So hopefully that was useful. I'll see you guys on the next one.